Okay, great. So thank you very much for joining. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all the audience here in person, also online, and of course to our panelists. So today we're going to talk about digital innovations in carbon markets and how they can increase and improve efficiency in the process, reliability, and credibility in monitoring, reporting, and verification activities. We're going to talk to the panelists, and they're going to give us some concrete examples of how this has been happening on the ground and how you've been implementing these digital technologies and solutions. Also, what we want to talk about is how does this foster trust between actors, right? So can digital innovations, technologies, solutions foster trust and therefore also increase the value of carbon credits? So that's what we're going to talk about as well, plus any impediments that you guys are facing, challenges when rolling out these solutions. Also looking to the future, what do we need to do to make this happen? What do we need to do to roll out these digital solutions to their full glory, basically? So that's kind of what we're going to cover today. And we're going to have a TED Talk style type of structure. So we actually have a fourth panelist who is going to call in from Australia, but maybe this person will join. If not, we're going to give you guys even a little bit more time to pitch basically your experience and your insights around this topic. So they'll stand up, they'll have their pitch, and then we'll give the floor to the audience to ask questions. But also the panelists, feel free to ask any questions to the other panelists who just gave their pitch. Please wait until after the presentation. So we have about 50 minutes to do that. So without any other delay, I'd like to introduce our panelists here. So I had a different order, but that's fine. So I'm going to start with you, Ben. So Ben is the VP of Policy at Sylvera. He's heading the carbon data. It's a leading carbon data firm. And in his role, Ben forges partnerships with governments, regulators, key industry initiatives to shape policy that supports investments into real climate action. So thank you, Ben, for being here. And also with us, we have Cindy, who's to the left here. And let me just introduce you. So Cindy Chiang is our carbon solutions lead at Pachama. And so she's working very closely with companies to integrate Pachama's forest carbon platform and measurement technology into their business models to achieve net zero targets. Yes, and we also have Jonathan Shopley with us today. And Jonathan Shopley is the I'm just going to have like a bunch of papers here, and I had the order a little bit mixed up here. Jonathan Shopley, Managing Director of External Affairs at Climate Impact Partners, and the company is focusing on engagement with national and international climate policy development. So thank you so much for being here today. So firstly, I'm going to invite Jonathan, you to the stage to provide us with your pitch. I have a couple of leading questions for you. So I'll give you here your microphone. Yep. So let me just introduce.
We stand up for
yes, this is sort of a TED Talk style,
right.
And so if you could stand up.
I will.
And do your pitch.
Sure.
So I have a question for you. So what kind of interest are your clients showing in digital MRV solutions? Do they feel that these types of carbon projects are more credible? And are they willing to pay a higher price for these credits? So if you could just talk about this topic, give us some key insights. Great.
Okay. So I know, hello, everybody. I know that the focus is on DMRV. I'm going to start with a contentious statement and say, for most of our clients, they don't really care. They're not buying DMRV. What they're buying are projects that have great transparency and a real opportunity to track them in real time. Also, the opportunity to understand those projects in great depth beyond carbon, which you can't see, but more of the activities. I mean, in nature-based solutions, how are the projects developing? So from my perspective, clients will pay more, and we do see clients paying more for projects that will have DMRV-enabled capabilities to track and report on progress, particularly those clients who, in the current state of the voluntary carbon market, less so in compliance, where they're taking positions in investing in projects rather than buying ex post credits. And in order for clients to take those steps, and I'm thinking of one in particular, and I can't say the name, they are much comforted by the fact that they will get real-time information as they go, that there'll be greater transparency and therefore an opportunity to understand the risks associated with projects, but also to be able to mitigate them as new information may come forward. The narrative is very important in the voluntary carbon market, and having real-time flow of information, how many cook stoves are being used, how trees are going in afforestation projects is part of the story and enabled by that. There's the whole aspect of due diligence and monitoring, particularly for these forward contracts, and knowing that we're getting a stream of data as opposed to a 5-yearly verification exercise is very comforting in terms of risk management. And then the other issue is earlier vintages, or at the moment, particularly in nature-based solutions, there's a 5-year, 7-year period before it's really worthwhile for projects to go for verification. With DMRV, we have an opportunity to reduce that time period, and therefore to get credits, and particularly for project developers, the other partners in Climate Partners, that means that they get early access to the market and therefore returns on their credits. So for all of those reasons, I believe that projects that are using and applying DMRV capabilities will get better prices in the market for all of those reasons. They're valued by project developers and they're valued by clients.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Does anybody have any questions from the audience right now to anything that Jonathan said? Please, we can use this time right now to ask really any questions about what he was talking about. If not, of course, I already have some questions prepared for you. So when you talk about your clients wanting, near real-time issuance of credit, sort of this continuous flow of data, do they talk about sort of what parts of the data? So do they want, is it the transparency? Is it really, making an analysis of that data to show them sort of what the impacts are? So is it really the transparency in getting that data, or is it, an analysis of that data to show sort of what impacts, they're creating, or is it really just to know that the project is being verified? Could you explain a little bit specifically, what kind of data are they?
So in the voluntary carbon market, it's different things for different clients. Quality and value is very, it's really shaped by the client's needs. So for those that are really getting and extracting value from their use of carbon credits as a compensation mechanism or as an offsetting mechanism, for some of our clients, it's really the narrative of the projects that they've invested in or bought credits from, and therefore having a real-time reel, as it were, of what's going on the ground, or at least an update on, for example, how many stoves are being deployed and how that program is working and how it's increasing in geographic area, some visualization of that, which is enabled by digital monitoring and verification, in my view. That's of high value. Those who are putting their money into projects in the anticipation of getting credits out of those, or in fact, perhaps participating in the secondary market, for them, it's a risk management. How's it doing? We've got capital invested. We want to know that we're going to get a return. Is the DMRV data that we're getting, stream data we're getting, giving us comfort that our expectations for that project will be met? And then remembering that we sort of operate as an intermediary from the project development side, developer side, there are a range of benefits, and that's more about getting getting earlier vintages to market, because the older vintages do tend to get a lower price. The newer vintages get a higher price in general. So being able to sort of move credits through to market at speed is valued. So those are you were asking what it is. I think it is a capacity that is inevitable given the digital strengths that are developing in the marketplace. I will say, though, that everybody is slightly, we all want change and we all want to turn this market into a frictionless market, or as a low friction market. And digitization really helps with that. but it means changing all the things that you've done in the past. And there are downsides to that. And there are, hurdles that you have to overcome. So in speaking to both clients and project developers, you always get we know we've got all these things that are going to bring value and also support higher prices, but it is a bit of a pain in the arse getting there.
Tell me that. We don't have to ask that. Great. The panelists, you have a question for Jonathan in what he's talking about. Does it resonate with you, or is there maybe a follow-up question that you have?
How's that? Okay, cool. Not so much a question, but I think definitely a lot of what you're mentioning definitely resonates. I feel like this industry has a tendency to latch onto the alphabet soup of, different terminologies, and DMRV kind of gets tossed around as potentially a one-stop shop that can solve everything. So at Pachama, we are a mission-driven company. We focus exclusively on nature restoration and conservation because we know that it has an outsized influence on our ability to hit the Paris target. And so we are looking at how can we bring technology to bear to support this market. And Jonathan's identified a couple of different stakeholders in this ecosystem already. And each of those stakeholders are asking for something a little bit different. Ultimately, at Pachama, we're laser focused on creating a platform that can serve all of these stakeholders because we want to grow and catalyze ultimately an informed community that can confidently make investments in nature based on aligned incentives and values. And that means you have to deliver value to the landowners and farmers who want to manage their land so that there is land and livelihood opportunities for the next generation. You've got your buyers who are, I was in the Nature Positive Hub yesterday, and someone asked a question and said, buyers are looking for Goldilocks projects. It's kind of like, I don't want it too big. I don't want it too small. I want it just right? They want a little bit of everything. And then you've got developers that are looking for resource and operational efficiency to move through the feasibility and verification process that registries require. And so building a technology platform that can do all of these things means that we have to stand up little pieces bit by bit. And so today, we have a marketplace where you can buy projects confidently. We have evaluation technology that can be applied to projects that are already trading in the spot market. But it actually requires an entirely different set of technology tools to apply it for project development, right? So, credit yield estimation is very different technology tool than REDD+ baseline mapping. The underlying data products that you need for early stage reforestation monitoring in that 0 to 5 year timeframe is really different than estimating forest carbon change for your REDD+ projects. And so we are starting to build models that can do these discrete things, but ultimately they need to feed into a platform that can move project data from one end of the market to another, invite auditors in, connect and integrate with registries that are already adapting. I think in the next room, Vera's talking about programmatic updates, right? And so these are all super exciting things, but it is not easy. So very excited to chat and just hear more about, what concerns you guys have, questions that we can, really have a good discussion. Sorry, I kind of.
No, it's fine. Thanks, Cindy. I'm still going to get you to stand up though, briefly.
Oh no, I really don't want to.
So thank you so much for, explaining what Pachama does and sort of, what you're facing and some of the challenges. Can you maybe explain sort of a concrete example where sort of, using your digital services, where has that created value? Let's say either in a transaction, or you seeing price premiums coming from some of the work that you're doing? Could you give maybe a concrete example of that? And also just talk about what are some of the challenges you're facing right now with, the services that you're providing? And when you're speaking to clients, what challenges are you faced with and how do you think you can overcome those?
Sure. I'll start with the concrete examples of how we're applying tech today. So when Pachama started 3-4 years ago, the biggest question, the biggest challenge the market was facing was around quality for REDD+ projects and overcrediting. And so we focused a lot of our early efforts on developing a REDD+ baseline mapping tool that is dynamic. And now it's fully automated for Brazil. And we are very quickly looking to expand the application of the tool into Peru and Colombia as well. And projects that we've evaluated using that tool versus projects that we still have to do a little bit of more manual analysis. Buyers tend to prefer the projects that can use our, we call it the dynamic baseline tool, because it delivers a different layer of insight. It has included uncertainty quantification. So when you have a baseline, that's your counterfactual scenario, right? And so there's a lot of different ways that can actually shake out in reality. And so we're able to estimate and quantify that uncertainty, apply it back to the baseline. And that extra analysis really gives buyers just more confidence in, reputational risk management. We are able to monitor the performance of the projects and really catch reversal risks early on. For many of the projects that's already on our platform. So that's another way that buyers engage with our portal. Some of the biggest challenges is, I kind of think about it in two ways. One, this stuff is super complicated. It's really hard to explain to a client how the remote sensing algorithm works and why they should trust it. We've published algorithm methodology documents for the scientific community. You can access it. There's a listing of all of the data products that we use. And so we tend to lean into transparency to really help talk about that. And then on the other hand, at the end of the day, a business is a business, and contracting for the staff, especially if you're looking into the future, becomes really challenging. When you're looking at dynamic baselines, there's always the inevitable question of you can't predict the future. So how do you price that? And so, it requires clever, financial and contracting structures as well when you think about how the tech can be, adopted into a system.
Great. So you're also talking about maybe readiness as well of the different actors involved. And I mean, there's a lot of variation there as well. Okay. So from the audience, would there be any questions right now at all for our panelists? Can somebody bring a microphone to?
Okay. Yeah. Hi, my name is Diego. I am working for a project developer company in Colombia. So I'm really glad to hear that you guys from Pachama are moving or thinking about expanding your services to Colombia. I was having a conversation with a potential landowner who was willing to work with Digital MRV for developing a carbon project. And I got the question of, okay, Diego, how you guys differentiate from the business as usual way of developing carbon projects, right? So that's kind of the challenge, right? So try to educate maybe those landowners or the potential reforesters that want to develop carbon projects using DMRV and try to establish a clear difference between the business as usual way of developing carbon projects and the benefits of developing carbon projects using DMRV. So how you guys go about it? How you guys can solve this question? like making a comparison between going through the whole let's use Vera as an example, right? So I'm wanting to develop a Vera carbon project, going through the whole verification and measuring and reporting that Vera demands from us. Whereas if I go with another company that is really savvy about DMRV, what are the benefits from that comparing to the other ones?
Yeah, kind of just briefly, and then of course I'll give it to the panelists. You're kind of asking sort of how does the DMRV really fit into the current system? Sort of so if you have a verification process, you have standard rules and requirements and methodologies, and you're sort of asking, you have, like Pachama, or you have Sylvera, you have others, you have technology innovations that can be used, and how does that sort of align and fit into the current system? Is that what is that how I could clarify it? Yeah.
For example, that is one example of the benefit of DMRV.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that I'm curious about.
I can just sort of answer based on what we're doing today, right? I think a lot will probably change into the future, but so Pachama is turning our lens into the origination of new projects. And Mercado Libre is one of our first sort of investors in this new business. And thanks to them, we were able to finance, run an RFP that really put out a call to landowners willing to think about a carbon project. And then our team received something back like 210 applications from different farmers of different sizes. And so you're looking at individual farmers who own 70 hectares of land versus, you know, the Mexico chapter of TNC who have like a much, you know, different kind of land access and profile and how they approach development. It became really challenging for our team to evaluate the quality of these application responses and figure out, you know, based on the initial project data and information, which projects have the highest potential for being eligible, and then financially feasible, and then ultimately successful, right? And so we developed a system that we're looking to commercialize in the next 2 quarters, but we're already starting to use it internally. It's a feasibility analysis that allows us to run some of the foundational questions around additionality, and it's set up to align with the requirements of Vera's forthcoming ARR methodology. So the system was designed at the start to be methodology conformant. And so we're very quickly able to understand the potential additionality or non-additionality of these projects. And then from there, we take like, you know, 50, that allows us to say, probably not for right now, for like 50% of the applicants, and then focus our time on the other 50%. And then we run the model again to look at credit yield estimation potential. And then that allows us to say, okay, these are probably more financially feasible. And so it's really, you're looking at, you know, that resource and operational efficiency at play at that early project design stage. And I think if I were a landowner, I would love if someone can just tell me right away, do I have a project or do I not, right? I think in the manual world, you're looking at months of analysis. And if I was a private landowner with access to 70 hectares, I'm not going to be able to pay for that feasibility study. But we have a portal now where any landowner can log in and just enter in some data just to get that signal. And so I think those are the ways that you start to unlock some of that operational efficiency that will ultimately translate into cost efficiencies as well.
I thought that your question might have been a little, not a little different, but how does it look different? I mean, you know, you looked at me, Nadine, and said, do I have anything to say? I don't know how these systems work. So what changes? You know, you're moving from spreadsheets to what does the API look like? You know, the interface. Was that perhaps your question? You know, how does it look on the ground? And if you're a project developer, what is all the painful parts of this? That to me seems to be what's on the project developer's side.
I think it boils down to also
SustainCERT.
Yeah, I mean, I think it boils down to also, you know, when you think about DMRV, you have all the actors in the market, and it's really difficult to sort of align with each other on what we mean by it all, actually. So if we're saying, you know, digital monitoring, reporting, verification from SustainCERT's perspective, we're really talking about how would we digitize the verification process? Like, how do we, and nobody thinks about that either. So like, you know, we can have a bunch of platforms doing, you know, digitization on data and reporting, but if the verifier is not capable of receiving that data, you're still going to have a bottleneck. And exactly, how does that interface look? Is it for us? Do we need to develop it? Is it for the project developers? Is it for the land, you know, holders? And so I think it's also, we need to maybe agree a little bit more on sort of how do we define DMRV and who are the actors involved. So I think maybe that should be sort of our next panel session in the next event where we can talk about that and have like a working session with each other. But yeah, it does start there. And I think a lot of the conversations we have as well with these panels is to sort of get more clarity and get more alignment on what we all can do. Because a lot of times you think, oh, wait, they're competing, but maybe nobody is actually. Everybody's just providing a service to the market to, you know, to the extent that their sort of platform can, you know, to the service that it can provide, but it's difficult to communicate that, I think, a lot of the times. Is there any other questions from the audience? Because if not, then I'm going to get over to you, Ben, and invite you to take the stage if you like. Ben is going to talk about Sylvera and what Sylvera is offering to the market right now. So I do have a sort of a triggering question for you. We obviously have a lot of media attention around quality of carbon credits. So do you see a greater role for technology solutions in carbon markets? And if so, which type of solutions do we need to scale up in order to create more value and raise prices? So Ben, if you'd like to take the stage, and maybe Cindy, could you pass your microphone to Ben? Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadine, for the opportunity to speak today. And I have to say, I see a lot of experts in DMRV in the room, so I really hope this can be a conversation and can't wait for your questions. But to Nadine's question, firstly about Sylvera. So I should start by saying we are not a DMRV provider. However, we do provide a lot of the technology which looks a lot like DMRV, and I think that's why it's a topic that's of great interest to us and hopefully something we can speak to helpfully. Specifically, the overlap between what we do and DMRV, as maybe more narrowly defined, is around remote carbon accounting, which is one of the core components that is required to issue reliable credits. And so to the question about improving trust in the market, DMRV essentially provides the potential, as we've already heard, for greater accuracy, greater speed, greater precision, which is often confused with accuracy, but is distinct. And ultimately, that should then result in higher trust. We've seen also on the flip side that many of the studies underpinning some of the critical media reports this year have relied on the same technologies. And so it's kind of a race to the top on this accuracy question using these remote sensing technologies. So Sylvera, as Nadine mentioned, is a carbon data provider looking to incentivize investment in real climate action. And the main way that we do that right now is by providing carbon credit ratings, so essentially Moody's for carbon. The way that the DMRV-like technologies feed into our ratings is that a core pillar of our ratings for a carbon project is the accuracy of the carbon accounting. And so essentially we are doing some of the same carbon accounting that the DMRV provider might be doing and making sure that we reach similar conclusions. And if we reach the same conclusion as the number of credits that have been verified, then we would give a carbon score of 100%. In some cases, we give a higher score. So actually, they've underestimated the total carbon impact of the activities, and sometimes a lower score. So that's how we come into it. Crucially, we are independent from the projects. And so that's one of the big distinctions with DMRV providers is that we are not a part of the issuance process, but we assess credits after they've been released into the market. So to the question about what technologies need to scale, I mean, firstly, there has been this huge leap in the quality of what's already out there, particularly when we look at the carbon accounting for forests, which is, of course, one of the main project types out there, one of the main categories of avoided deforestation, whether that's planned or unplanned. There are three specific areas where I think DMRV and remote carbon accounting is going to go next here. The first of which is the underlying reference data that is used to quantify the carbon per hectare in a given area of forest, which to date has been based on what's called allometric data, which is essentially a medieval technology of wrapping a tape measure around a tree in order to measure the size of the tree, and then you estimate how much biomass is stored in a given hectare of forest. It's quite inaccurate. Estimates vary, but probably around 40% inaccuracy, and also a systematic bias against underestimating the total carbon stored in tropical forests. And so in order to respond to that, we've been investing in a multi-scale LiDAR approach, whereby we essentially use laser scanners to measure the inside of the tropical forest in 3 dimensions to millimeter precision in order to get more accurate reference data, which is then the basis for the carbon quantification per hectare. So this is one area in which DMRV and remote carbon accounting, I think, is going next, is more accurate reference data that underlies the assessments that are made. The second area is there's 2 super exciting missions next year to launch new satellites for SAR data, which is synthetic aperture radar. So basically 2 new radar satellites next year, which are going to revolutionize the level of accuracy and the detail of the radar data that we can collect from space. One is being launched by the European Space Agency, one by NASA. They're both going to be awesome, so watch out for those. And then the third area that I'd call out is currently most remote carbon accounting for forests is essentially a binary assessment. It's called an FNF model, forest or non-forest. And of course, forests are not binary. There is all sorts of levels in between of forest degradation, And I think that the models are starting to now account for that as well. So rather than being on a binary scale of forest, non-forest, they're moving towards a continuous scale of how much biomass per hectare is available. So I think these are three of the areas where particularly the forest carbon accounting and DMRV is moving. Other types of nature-based solutions could also benefit from remote carbon accounting and DMRV specifically. Mangroves pose additional challenges because much of the biomass is below water. So that's something that I know is being looked at, but that's kind of one of the new frontiers. And then also soil carbon, which is huge in volume, huge potential, very difficult to measure remotely, not impossible. We've, for example, got some grant funding from the government in the UK to look into this in more detail. And we know that others are doing this as well. A lot of investment right now in how soil carbon can be measured remotely, but a really exciting area to keep an eye on there. And then there's non-nature based solutions as well. So for example, the new sensors that are able to detect with great precision individual greenhouse gases that are being emitted almost in real time. This is kind of the next frontier, but this would allow much more accurate measuring of cook stoves, for example, so you can see actually what's being used in a given village or remote community. And then there's also the next horizon for the carbon markets, which is around things like direct air capture. Again, you'd be able to measure the potential for leaks in some of these new installations using this next generation of technology. So that's probably still 5 to 10 years out, but I think that's where it's all going. So I'll leave it there, but looking forward to your questions, and if there's none, Nadine's questions.
So much, Ben. Are there any questions for Ben from the audience? Yes, in the back there. Leah, is there another microphone for the gentleman?
Thank you. Thanks to all the speakers for your insights. My name is Josh Brown. I work for a carbon project developer called Task. We predominantly distribute cook stoves, not entirely. And for instance, to put some DMRV technologies into our projects, you look at potentially doubling or tripling the cost base of the project. So in the case of cook stoves, that means less money to buy stoves and distribute them. I want to hear from the panel, like, is there a line of, you know, where you should basically draw the line with DMRV and try and keep it as simple as possible so that you can put more money back into communities and not just into like ancillary technology?
Happy to speak to that. And it's a great question because at the moment, it's really it's a buyer's market, given where demand is right now. And so I'd say the customer is always right. If you find a buyer that is willing to pay more than the traditional price for a cook stove project because they want that certainty and they want to have the kind of the sensors in all the cook stoves to make sure they're being used, then that's fantastic. But that would probably be quite a difficult buyer to find in the market right now. The alternative is that buyers will just kind of take it on faith essentially and say, well, we'll trust you that they're being used, or we'll trust the surveys that are being done in the communities, which may not have 100% reliability, but it kind of keeps the cost down and it can help ensure that more of the money goes to the community. So it kind of depends on what you're able to sell at the moment, I think.
I mean, to give an example, got one, probably our best client, and all they want from us is to change from a monitored sample where we're going out and doing KPTs to one where we actually have a stove sensor, which will tell us basically how many times the stove has been heated beyond a threshold value. And we still have to send someone out into the field in order to capture the data from that. But we think that's actually a really appropriate solution. It keeps the cost down. It actually means that we're employing more people. So our monitoring budget is still being spent on keeping people permanently employed by Task throughout the duration of the project. And again, I think that's a reasonable sell to experienced carbon market traders, people that have been in the market for 10, 15 years and understand these trade-offs. But I want to hear more from the panel whether, you know, newer buyers, people that are less experienced would be won over by the argument, or whether they just really want to see a whole tech stack like you guys have been talking about.
So can I, Josh, I mean, I thought that your final statement of, you know, having a sophisticated buyer who understands that sampling is a good way to go, understands that a lot of the benefits of the kinds of projects that have dominated the voluntary carbon market are about local employment, empowerment, etc. I think it's a good story that lands well with most of our clients. They understand that. And particularly, I mean, if you think about the voluntary carbon market, it's dominated by tech companies, service-based companies, consultancies, and some financial institutions. So the rubric for them is value for money, efficiency, risk management, but also the story behind the project. So I think the solution that you sort of proposed, which is, you know, sample, but keep people in the field, is one that would sell well. And certainly our, you know, client solutions team would be able to educate a client very quickly on that kind of benefit and say, this costs more for obvious reasons.
I specifically can't speak to what my colleagues in the ratings team might make of this approach, but to me, it sounds very pragmatic. And actually, I think that's been a bit of a failing of the carbon markets community over the last few years, is that we've let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So it sounds like a pretty reasonable solution.
Just to add a couple of things. One, technology use case is different for different project types as well. For some projects, certain types of DMRV make sense. For others, it does not, right? And so just wanted to kind of set that expectation. And then, you know, coming from a tech company, I also, not to be contentious, but it's like tech is not going to solve everything, right? Like we focus a lot on RED+ projects that there's a human dimension that is so important for permanence. A lot of these projects are sustainable development projects that is just using carbon finance to make it a little bit easier. And so ultimately, this market requires a lot of buyer education. I don't love the whole vintage thing. I know that it's real, but I know it has a price differentiator, but it's not valid from a science basis. What you're describing is not valid. Like for certain project types, like we had a buyer who was looking at a RED+ project on our platform and was really pushing back on the quality because they felt like this is a project that was, it's taken place on privately owned land that engages in sustainable timber alongside investments in the community that ultimately is what's required to curb deforestation in his region. But they didn't like that story. And so to Jonathan's point, that's why the solutions team at Pachama exists too, right? Is to really support that buyer education. Tech is a part of the solution, but not all of it. So just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you. There was another question, I think, the gentleman in the cap over there, yeah.
Yeah, two simple questions for, sorry, your name from Sylvera. Ben, sorry, Ben. First question, I do understand very well how your comparison with the project developers' numbers in terms of carbon accounting impacts your rating of a given project. Does the simple fact that the developer uses the DMRV or not also impact the, so not using the DMRV, do you start with a strike as a, okay, no.
No.
Okay, thanks. Other very simple question. You mentioned one of the next frontier in project development, specifically for mangroves, is the ability to measure carbon underwater. How is that any different or more difficult than measuring below ground biomass? Which is hardly inaccurate in the way it's done right now, but how do you see the difference and whether or not there would be an area for better or higher accuracy for what's below the air level?
Well, I mean, definitely below ground biomass is very difficult to measure remotely as well. And that's often done just by taking kind of standard conversion factors, as I understand it, depending on the blend of the species of trees in a given area of forest. But the challenge with mangroves, as I understand it, is twofold. And again, I'm not a technical specialist, as you can probably already tell. But one of the challenges is that the fact that the base is water means that the remote sensing, whether it's LiDAR or radar, it kind of interacts with the surface in a different way because it's not uniform, it's constantly moving. The other challenge is the tides. So the amount of biomass that is above or below the waterline changes continuously, depending on which point in the tidal cycle you are. And so that also makes it challenging to know exactly what you're seeing when you look at the remote measurements. Again, not insurmountable challenges, but just additional challenges beyond stationary trees in soil.
Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you. So we have time for maybe one more question. I don't know if there's a question from the online audience. I'm not sure if there's a question there. And if not, then what we can do is continue to, so we have a Mentimeter, so we can put that up, and it's just to get an idea from the audience of, where are we at with DMRV? Does this create really trust between actors? Like we say, we've sort of explained here that is indeed, we can create that trust and more assurance and investments and projects, but we also have to listen to the buyers and create that narrative. So there's a scan there, I think a QR code, and that would allow you then to get to the Mentimeter to ask you some questions about, yeah. So I think they're putting up the slide again. I see some action in the back. Yeah, I think if they can go back. Just do show of hands as well. So if technology is now failing on us, we're going to just do a show of hands. So yeah, I can do a show of hands, really. So the first question is, will digital MRV or digital technology solutions increase trust between actors in carbon markets? So who's agreeing to that? Please put up your hand. So there you go. This is the join the Mentimeter now. So if you guys want to be more anonymous, then if you want to be anonymous and don't show your hands, you can scan the QR code and then we'll show the results in a second. The other question is going to be on, will digital MRV technologies lead to price premiums? So just trying to see whether the panelists have convinced you of these two statements, yes or no.
Can I add something while people are voting?
Please.
Because, you framed it, and I think we've made the case that it's more expensive because you've got sensors. But with any tech-driven application, we know that as soon as you get greater degrees of uptake and penetration, the costs come down. So and I'm not trying to influence the audience, I would say that we're putting too much emphasis on this sort of the short-term increased costs. But what we can expect, this is going to take incredible friction out of the market. We know that. And the more it gets embraced, in my view, and the more it gets implemented, and the more invisible it becomes. So this panel won't exist in 5 years' time. DMRV is what you'll do. So I don't see that as a sort of necessary statement about how the market's going to work in 3 to 5 years' time.
Maybe just as sort of closing statements, we can ask the panelists just to talk about sort of what's next. What do we need to do to really roll out DMRV innovations and technologies? Sort of, if you can just keep it, simple to sort of what's the biggest thing that needs to happen from your perspective.
Thank you. There's already work underway from the major registries and standards to incorporate DMRV in their methodologies, which is fantastic. It's very welcome. It's potentially slightly overdue, but that is going to then bring this into the mainstream. And as Jonathan said, in a few years, DMRV will just be MRV. Kind of going around with a clipboard or a tape measure is going to seem pretty old-fashioned. So I think that's kind of the inevitable direction. And the next step beyond that is incorporating this data into carbon accounting at the national level and how that reports into the UNFCCC kind of NDC progress and so on. Because the more we can align project-based and carbon credit level carbon accounting with national carbon accounting, I think the sooner we'll see the integration of all of the different ways of stacking up the carbon in the world.
Yeah, so earlier Jonathan asked, sort of like how does it look different? And so hopefully where we're moving towards, like, the ideal state is the verifiers auditing the model and doing spot checks on the rest, right, with site visits. Now, there are certain verification components that you might not want to automate remotely, the sort of legal and social aspects of these projects, but that should, the digitization of MRV should unlock a lot of it. And so, like Ben was saying, I think registries are already shifting in that direction. I hope they can move quickly. What Pachama wants to do is really showcase how it can be done. I think I used to work at the Climate Action Reserve. There was a voluntary carbon component to CAR's business. And we always talked about how we can innovate in our protocol development for the voluntary market so that we can, influence the compliance market. The grassland protocol was an excellent example of how we were able to do that. And so I think often about that, sitting at a startup where we want to be at the forefront of showing how it can be done, de-risk it, and then it have, greater market adoption through the voluntary market, and then trickle down into compliance. And so, as much as everyone wants to move quickly, we certainly want to support doing that.
Well, I did make some statements just as a filler, but a couple of things for me that I would add. DMRV, collects an enormous amount of data, and it has a very specific application, which is about validating and verifying and then registering a credit. But that information is of value to different users. So, when we talked earlier about an API, I think that what will be interesting for me is to see a new industry or a new segment of the industry that, provided that this data can be accessed in some form, free at the point of access, and then analyzed. So I'm thinking we're all sitting here and we know that, we're in a stage where carbon markets and the voluntary carbon market, is under a lot of scrutiny. And there's a lot of debate and about, various methodologies, whether they be red or cook stoves. What would be great is if the information that is used for DMRV, or generated through DMRV is made available to analysts so that we can very quickly develop a sector-wide view as to whether we're under or over crediting for whatever reason and correct that. But at the moment, what really irks me, and I'm sure many other people, is that we're using data sets from projects that are sometimes 20 years old, and the data sets are 10 years old, and we're making assumptions about the market today, which is making people feel nervous. So for me, one of the big benefits that would come is if this data can support a much more rapid turnover. Oh gosh, that isn't working. It's not failing, it's just not working. And my sense is that our community, our industry is very committed to continual learning and improvement, of which DMRV, of course, is one element of that. But it'd be great to leverage that even further.
Great. So thank you so much to the panelists for giving your insights from the technologies that you're using and developing, and you're working with the market and you're continuing to do so, and so are we. I hear that transparency is important. It's how you analyze the data, it's how you get the data, but it's also making it sort of accessible, I think, to the different actors involved. So yeah, thank you so much. We did have the results of the Mentimeter. I don't think that's being showed. So maybe just a raise of hands. Who thinks trust between actors is going to increase with DMRV? Okay, so I would say about 85% of the audience. And who thinks it's going to lead to price premiums at some point? So a little less sure about the pricing there. Okay, good. So I think you guys did a wonderful job convincing our audience on DMRV solutions. And I'll thank you again. And thank you so much for attending this event. And see you later at the drinks. Bye.